welcome. My name's Callum. I'm the president of the Cambridge Society of Economic Pluralism, and thank you all very much for coming here today for our first event of term on the topic is economics predictable. And we're really fortunate to have two fantastic speakers who I'll introduce as we'll go along. In terms of the format of the discussion, first each speaker will speak for around 20 to 25 minutes each through their presentation, and then we'll hopefully have around 30 minutes afterwards for you to ask questions. In terms of our first speaker, we're very fortunate to have Professor Tony Lawson, who works here at Cambridge in the economics faculty and teaches economics and philosophy, and he also runs a Cambridge Realist Workshop, which is part of the Cambridge Ontology group, and he's also the senior treasurer of our society, and we're very lucky to have him to come here and speak for us today.
Thank you. I've just spotted a camera. That presumably means I'm not free to walk up and down.
I think you can walk with space of...
backwards and forwards.
Yeah,
right?
from that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, perhaps I'll sit down then.
So this is not going to be on YouTube, is it?
I think it will.
You're not serious?
Do you not want it to be?
Okay, we'll talk about it.
You realise what you're saying now is also going to be on YouTube. Okay, well thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here again. I'm especially happy to be on the same programme as Jochen, even though I was worried at first that we might say the same thing. Jochen was a student of mine many years ago, and the great thing of being a heterodox economist is the people who want to come and do a PhD with you, usually want to do it because they're very interested, because I was given this blurb, you realise if you come and work with me, it ends your career. It's not a good career move. And only the interesting people sort of say, never mind, I want to do it. And it's even better to know that Jochen survived and is actually a professor at this university. So anyway, I'm happy to be here with Jochen. There isn't much time. The topic is something like, can economists predict, or can we predict the economy? I forget the precise title. But it's a topic on which we could all, I'm sure, talk all night. I'll try not to, because I've been given 20 minutes or so. So I'm going to restrict myself to 4 points. Point 1, successful prediction is something that economists have not achieved. It's an observation. The attempts to predict the economy has been largely a failure. I think that's pretty well known with respect to the recent economic crises, so much so that even the Queen has commented on the failure of economists to predict what went on, but it's always been so. Since the introduction of econometrics into the discipline about 1938, there's been repeated failure to predict significantly what goes on in the economy. I was looking recently at a paper by John Kay called Cracks in the Crystal Ball. It was produced in the mid-90s. At the time he was head of the forecasting group, or part of it, in the London Business School, and he compared the forecasts of 34 different groups and concluded all of them are wrong. Most of them spend their time trying to copy each other and not step too far of the line, but the gap between what they forecast and what turns out each time is not true, I think was the words he used. But it's always been the case. I mean, you might say, well, how do economists get econometricians or forecasters get the papers published? Well, when they publish them, it looks as though they're doing well, but that's because they're using past data and they run regressions billions of times, and they transform the data so much by having variables that are squared, logged, squared, or to the power n lagged many times. You can transform the data and fit anything to anything, given enough degrees of freedom. But every single time a model is presented, a forecasting model, prediction model, and new data comes along, those models break down. It's true that some people who do claim, heterodox economists, who do claim to have predicted the crisis, but not really, only in the sense that there's always someone who, if you've got a Christmas lottery, there's always someone who's got the winning ticket. There's so many, everyone, whatever you can think of, although Jochen's going to talk, I think, about unknown nouns, but all the outcomes that you can imagine occurring, someone predicts them, so someone's always right. But that person who's right this time isn't the person who's right next time. And ever since I've been in economics, there's been someone every year predicting a crisis next year. And eventually the crisis comes and someone gets it right. But generally, typically, almost universally, prediction has not been successful in economics. All right, that's the first point. We can discuss it, obviously. Second point I want to make, except in trivial cases, prediction of economic phenomena is not possible anyway. So it's not just in case it hasn't happened, it's not feasible. Now, why do I say that? And this is where ontology comes in. Callum said I do ontology. Indeed I do. Ontology, I guess you all know, but just in case, onto means being, ology is a study of, so it's a study of being. I'm interested in the nature of stuff. The nature of money, the nature of capitalism, the nature of corporations, the nature of gender, the nature of quarks, quantum fields, whatever, the nature of stuff. Why is that relevant? The first thing to say, you're all ontologists, you all do it, you all did it today. Coming here, walking around Cambridge, you act very differently according to whether the thing in front of you is a bush, a student, a bicycle, a car, an elephant, a college, whatever. You weigh it up and act accordingly. I bet none of you try to get into this building through the wall. You you weigh up the nature of stuff and act accordingly. And ontology comes into everything else. The world is full of useful tools like toothbrushes, lawnmowers, scissors, pens, and so on, but they have their specific uses. You probably think I was pretty strange if I said I use a lawnmower to brush my teeth, or I use my toothbrush to try and cut the hedge. Tools are useful, but they have specific uses, and the same is true of mathematical tools. Now, the claim I make of the sort of mathematical predictive tools that economists use are not appropriate in the conditions in which they use them, which is why they continually fail. And this obviously is where ontology comes in. Because if I say the sort of tools that economists use aren't appropriate to analysing, predicting social reality, the question is, well, what is the nature of social reality such that there's a mismatch? Well, the first question is, when are these predictive mathematical tools relevant? Under what conditions? And the first condition is, are those closed systems, i.e. those in which event regularities occur? Correlations. Regularities that form whenever X, then Y. Can be with a little error term on the end, but these are the preconditions for your econometric modelling, your micro modelling, your macro modelling. They all presuppose a world of correlations. A world of correlations, to be guaranteed, presupposes a world of isolated atoms. By atoms, I just mean anything acts in the same way in the same conditions, to guarantee whenever X, then Y. Think of a wind-up dial, I put it down, it walks forward. Apologies for people who've heard me use this example before, but it's an easy example to use. You wind it up, put it down, conditions X, it walks forward unless something interferes with its walking forward. So you have to isolate it from countervailing forces. A passing dog might come along and it ends up over there. So you isolate it from the passing dog. That's the ontology that guarantees correlations in the social realm. If you think about it, that's the ontology underpinning every economic theory you get taught in your modelling classes, assuming you're economic students. Obviously, it's not wind-up dials you get. Most commonly, you get agents that optimize something, maximize profits, minimize costs, maximize utility, but you get constraints, theories put on the agents of analysis so that under conditions X, they always do Y. They're set up in a situation with a unique optimum and off they go to it. It doesn't have to be optimizing, it could be fixed rule following, it can be all sorts of assumptions made, but all the assumptions include those of the latest fads in fashion like behavioral economics and neuroeconomics serve to restrict the agents of analysis so they, under conditions X, they always do Y. Social reality, I claim, isn't like that. And again, what's the nature of social reality? This is where ontology comes in. I could spend all night and all week and all month talking about that, but I can't defend a view, but let me describe some features of a social ontology I think is realistic. First of all, I'll say social reality is open. Event regularities hardly occur. It's structured, there are different levels, just like in the non-social realm. Behind the falling leaf, there's gravity, aerodynamics, thermodynamic forces, so social reality is structured ontologically. Social reality is highly relational. I'll come back to that. It's also in process. It's characterized by emergence, by which I mean it's made up of totalities formed out of other features of the world. In fact, I would argue, if I had time, that starting from quantum fields and their excitation, forming quarks mix with other particles that form other particles, which mix with other things, all the way up to molecules, which interact to form human beings, water, mountains, and then we interact to form the totalities of social reality. I'm just trying to give you a feel for an alternative approach or view of reality. Social reality is also characterized by meaning, by value, and so on. Right, I'm listing. Let me go back to a couple of things I've said. Social reality is highly relational. It's constituted through internal relations. Internal relations, those relations whereby the last of the things related are constituted by those relations. They are what they are in virtue of the relationship in which they stand. Teachers and students are constituted in relation to each other. So are employer, employee, landlord, landlady, tenant. You can't have the one without the other. They are constituted through that relationship. We now, an emergent totality, is a seminar. I'm constituted as a speaker in relation to you, an audience. We propose each other, and we also have a chairperson who's constituted in relation to us. The nature of those social relations are rights and obligations attached to the positions we're in. We're in positions. You're in positions of attendees. I'm in the position of a speaker, according to which I have the right to speak and an obligation to speak. My right to speak is matched to your obligation to sit there quietly and pretend you're interested. When I finish, you'll have the right to tell me where I've got it wrong, and I'll have an obligation to reply to what you said about where I've got wrong. Our right to be here is met by the obligation of someone to provide the heating, the lighting, to keep the room clean, and so on. And the whole university, our rights to be in the university is met by the obligation of someone somewhere to fund it, and so on. The whole of social reality is made up of systems of rights and obligations forming social relations constituting totalities everywhere. The other feature I want to emphasize, I haven't got much time, so I'll stick to two, is the processual nature of everything social. Think of language as an easy example. I've been speaking now for about, longer than I thought, 5 or 10 minutes. A condition of my speaking to you, I'm speaking in English, is the English language, and it's an unacknowledged condition of my speech acts. Now, as I speak to you in English, and as you listen in English, as people throughout the world read, write, speak, and listen in English and every other language, the English language is being unintentionally reproduced and transformed. Transformed because I use funny words like ontology, and I make up words, and people make mistakes, and people spell and make up new words because it fits in with mobile text and so on. Everything is a process of transformation. So structure, like language, is a condition of our practices, speech practices, and through the sum total of people speaking, writing, and listening in English, it's transformed. The language is inherently processual, transformational in nature. But what is true of language is true of everything social. That is, everything that depends on us. It's true of CSEP, it's true of the economics faculty, it's true of this university, it's true of this town, it's true of the environment, the pollution, it's true of your embodied personalities. All these social features are reproduced, transformed through practices. Okay, that's just two features of this alternative view of the way social reality is. But if I'm right in them, and I hope you see they're not exactly, well, I don't think they're contentious claims. I haven't got time to defend them. But if I'm right, you can see why predictive modelling fails so badly. Remember, the ontology required of these models are closed systems of isolated atoms. Einstein showed social reality is not isolatable. Everything in the social realm is constituted in relation to everything else. You cannot isolate employers from employees, teachers from students, parents from children, or even the monetary system from the manufacturing system, or whatever. Everything is constituted of everything else. At the same time, social reality is not like these atoms that under conditions X always do the same thing Y. Everything's in process, everything's changing, everything is such that under the same conditions does something different. So it's easy to see why mathematical methods, predictive methods in economics have been such a failure. What we need to do is what they do in every other discipline, is instead of starting from the tool, we need to tailor our tools to the nature of the stuff we're dealing with. We want tools appropriate to the nature of social reality. And that's what happens in every other discipline. In the physical sciences, if they want to test the Higgs boson theory, for example, which explains how particles have appearance of mass when they seem not to have mass, they build the Hadron Collider, a particle accelerator at CERN, because it's appropriate to testing a theory. If they want to look at distant planets, they build a spacecraft. We ought to be doing the same and developing theories, methods, research tools appropriate to the ontology of the world in which we live, rather than starting from this tool all the time, predictive methods. Okay, first 2 points. Successful prediction doesn't happen. Second point, we can't have it. That's the pessimistic part of the talk. Now the optimistic part of the talk. Third point, we don't need prediction. We can do without it. We can explain, and that's more than enough. You might say, well, we want to do science, and science is all about prediction. Science is not about prediction. It's a very old-fashioned view of science that it's bound up with prediction. It's a view that's due to part of a positivist philosophy, but outside of economics, that philosophy died a long time ago, pretty much. Science, of course, is complex, multifaceted, but if there is something essential to it, it's the essential move is going from phenomena at one level to causes at a different level. From falling leaves to gravity, aerodynamics, thermodynamics. From cows and mad cow's disease wobbling their heads and falling over to the underlying cause, a prion. You not feeling well to the virus or whatever is responsible. This is characteristic of all the sciences that economists look up to. In physics, it's so characteristic that even if they can't find the cause, they give a name to it anyway. Currently, observations suggest the universe is expanding. They can't find what causes it expanding. There isn't enough energy or matter in the universe to cause it. So they invent it. They call it dark matter, dark energy. And the search is on to find it. But the move is from the phenomenon, expanding the universe, to the cause. That's a move we can do in economics too. All we need is a structured reality. If there are different layers of the social realm, then we can make that move from surface phenomena to the underlying causes. And there are. On the surface, there are practices, whatever practices we're interested in, and behind them are the structural causes, just like the practices of this seminar are facilitated by the rules, rights, obligations, positions underpinning it. So there are social structures underpinning all of social behaviour. So if you're interested in crisis, start from the phenomenon of the crisis as you experience, go underneath to the structural conditions that render it possible. If you're interested in oppression, identify the structural causes. If you're interested in poverty, identify the structural causes. So we can be scientific in precisely the sense of natural science. It's about going from surface phenomena to underlying causes. We don't need prediction for that. Prediction mostly occurs in well-controlled experiment where an atomistic-like mechanism is isolated, and then prediction is about testing and empirically identifying that mechanism. Outside the experiment, knowledge of, say, gravity is used to build bridges and send rockets to the moon. So there is a kind of prediction I support. If I take this pen, I predict that whatever I do with this pen gravity will be operating on it. When I go home tonight or into Cambridge, gravity will operate on this pen. You can't predict where the pen will be if you make predictions or find a way to undermine all your predictions, but you can predict the underlying tendencies, and that's enough to do everything we need to do. All right, so point 1, successful prediction doesn't happen. 2, we can't have it. Now I'm saying we don't need it. And my final point, we don't want it. We don't want it because it's inconsistent with human emancipation, to making the world a better place. If we could predict the incidence of AIDS in 30 years' time, or poverty, or number of crises, or whatever, then they're already determined. What we want is a world in which we can identify the causes of problems, of phenomena we don't like, so that we can transform them and make the world a better place. Let me elaborate just a little bit, then I'll finish off. Within the mainstream of economics, with the emphasis on mathematical model and prediction, policy always takes the following form. They build models, and these models take the form y as a function of x1 to xn. And then, let's say, z1 to zp. The little ones, the z's, are considered exogenous. The idea is we can set their values. They might be tax rates or interest rates or whatever. The goal then is prediction and control of the future. Notice first of all, even that, I mean, I'm not sure control, prediction is especially desirable, but it assumes agents are atomistic, that whenever you change this exogenous variable, interest rates, then everyone acts in a predictable way. But even that's kind of incoherent, because they've also got equations to predict what happens to interest rates and equations to predict what government spending is all about. Everything is represented by equations, so everything's determinate. There's no space ready for control making a difference anyway. So it's a determinate system, it's incoherent in the way it's presented, and it fails on its own terms. There is no successful prediction. What's the alternative? The alternative, given the kind of ontology I've hinted at to you, is to identify those structures which inhibit human flourishing and to transform them, to create space in which people can act in an emancipated way. Now that claim presupposes lots of things. First of all, that human beings can flourish, so we have to start doing the ontology of human beings. Notice in modelling, mainstream modelling activities, macroeconomics as you're taught it, if you're economists, the implicit assumption is everybody's the same. Rarely do we say, what do people need or want, how are they going to flourish, what policies should we choose. Certain policies are seen automatically as good and good for everyone at the same time. We have to, if we start from the other end, say, can people flourish? There's a debate there. I mean, do rocks flourish? People seem to flourish in a way rocks don't, although postmodernists argue against that view. There again, Spinoza thought that rocks flourish, as do deep ecologists. So there's a debate to have about the possibility of flourishing. If we do flourish, do we all flourish the same way? I think the answer is clearly not. We have very different sexual orientations, different genders, different ages, different cultural upbringings, different histories, different needs. We are different. The question really is, do we have anything in common? I think we do. We all have a need to enter social being, for example, which means we have a need to acquire languages. We have all sorts of needs that are shared, which are conditioned for our flourishing. Once we know what human flourishing is, we can ask the question, what structures are obstacles to human flourishing? Patriarchy seems to be an obvious structure. Any structure which encourages the oppression of one group by another, whether it's this gender by that gender, or immigrant by indigenous, or one religious group by another, and so on and so forth. In fact, we can ask a wider range of questions. When you're trying to predict with the correlations and the models break down as they always do, the people building the models usually say, oh, there's been a structural change in the economy and institutions changed or something. On this approach, we do not need to hold institutions constant. In fact, the whole point is to identify problematic ones and transform them. So we can look at all sorts of institutions, answer the problem. We can ask, even if capitalism is a problem, we can question everything. And in effect, that I think is what's going on with CSEP. We have conditions in the economics world, in the economics faculties, such that we cannot flourish as economists in the sense of pursue the truth, to uncover the world as it is. We're constrained by having to conform by a mathematical predictive model. It is a structural constraint on relevant research. So the goal, I think, is to transform the world to facilitate human flourishing. Now you might say that's pie in the sky, because the way I'm presenting it, we live in a system which is highly complex, and we haven't got much power to change the whole system. I think that's true. But I think rather than running away from that, we should face up to it, rather than sort of endless debate between austerity, anti-austerity, Keynesianism. What can we do in the meantime? One answer I think is important is eudaimonistic bubbles, building them. Eudaimonia as an Aristotelian word for one in which we all flourish. We build bubbles in which we can do things sort of protected, somehow protected from the forces around us that most concern us at the time. I see CSEP as a particular bubble within the economics faculty. You're creating an environment where you can have seminars where people can talk about the world as it is, or talk about philosophical issues, can talk about a range of things that are not countenanced in the faculty. I've been part of a realist workshop, and an ontology group that's been going for about the last 200 years. It too is a bubble. Retreats are bubbles, refugees are bubbles, gender studies groups are bubbles. Probably the most important bubble in this country over the last century, I think, is the National Health Service, founded on principles that are quite at odds with the mechanisms of the society around it. So that's basically it. You may not agree with what I've just said, or even much of what I've said, but I've tried to convey is there's a different approach to economics to be had once we give up on prediction. Prediction, we can't have it. We don't have it, successful prediction, we can't have it, but I'm trying to suggest we don't need it. We can be explanatory, it's successful, and it puts us on par with every other science. And at the end of the day, I don't think we want it. If we do without it, we can first emancipate economics, so that I'm sure many of you came into economics because you want to make the world a better place. And I know many of you grumble because you feel that the courses you do don't help you to do that. So we want to emancipate the discipline, and then through an emancipated discipline, work on making the world a better place too.
Fantastic. Our next speaker is Dr. Jochen Runde. He's also a member of faculty here at Cambridge, and is the head of the Economics and Policy subject group at the Judge Business School. And he'll be talking to us on top of predictability in the context of unknown unknowns.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
So, Callum, will you warn me when I'm close to running out of time?
Oh yeah, sure.
Okay. No, it's not working. It should work, right?
So
Fantastic.
you're not going to sit in front of the camera?
No, I need to see what's going on. Yeah. So what Tony said was quite true. At least a lot of it was quite true. So I was Tony's student a long time ago. Some of what I'm going to talk about today actually comes from work I did with him. But I should also say, in the interest of making clear this continuation, that the work I'm going to talk about is work that I do with former students of my own, Alberto Feduzzi, who's at SOAS now, and Phil Faulkner. And some of you would have been taught by Phil Faulkner, I guess, who teaches microeconomics at Clare College. Okay, I totally agree with Tony about the impossibility of predicting these one-off big events in economics and then doing that in a regular way. But I'm going to make the case that we can do much better than we do in identifying possibilities. So not predictions, but being more alive to what is possible. And that can be very useful in many circumstances. So I just quickly want to show you some slides. I know most of you are economics students and you see lots of equations. Well, if you come to a business school, you see lots of pictures. All right. And I think that's a good thing about business schools. Economists will say that's probably a bad thing about business schools. But here are some pictures. So this is Brexit, and the other picture is a picture of this uncivilized gentleman we all know who says uncivilized things in America. And the reason I wanted to start with these two cases is the surprising thing about them is how surprised so many people were when things like this happened. This guy could actually seriously be in the running to become president of the United States. And as all of you will know, there's been a lot of discussion about this, and a lot of discussion about there being different communities in America, in this country, and in other places. People living very, very different lives. The elite forgetting about the people that have been left behind in globalization and living in the post-industrial cities and all the rest of it. And that this is largely a protest vote. And of course that it is also then a very, very big political failure. You know, people in Westminster not knowing that this was going on, and then being very surprised when something like Brexit occurred. Someone who's written very well about it is this gentleman. This is a book that is 30 years old this year. So that's Thomas Nagel. He's a famous American philosopher. And he wrote this book in 1986 called The View from Nowhere, which I think is a book worth reading. But I bring it up because I really like the title. It's something that sounds like something a space cadet might say. Or remember hippies. You're too young to remember hippies. Hippies might have said something like that. The thing is, this idea of the view from nowhere, the contrast is with the view from somewhere. The idea that human beings, when we look at things, we're always coming from a particular point of view. So point of view might depend on our genders, might depend on what part of society we grew up in, whether we went to university or not, and so on. And it's only, he thinks scientists can get a view from nowhere, but really it's only God that has the full view from nowhere. That is a view from every particular place, knowing things in all of their aspects from every possible direction. Of course, human beings can't do that. I guess he's talking mostly about the way that our views on things are channeled by our situations, so the kind of things I described a moment ago, maybe our gender or whether we went to university or not, etc., etc. But there's been a similar kind of thing in economics, and this is a picture of someone who actually visits here sometimes, Daniel Kahneman. It's the only airport book worth buying. You know those books in the airport, 10 Steps to Becoming a Millionaire, and all of that stuff. Never buy those books, but this is a good book. And he is, of course, the great prophet of behavioral economics. I believe you guys actually get some behavioral economics these days. Is this true? A little bit. Okay. All right. An interesting guy because Nobel Prize winner for behavioral economics, for starting that with Amos Tversky. And he loves to say that he's never been to an economics course in his life. Now, it turns out that Tony is not a great fan of behavioral economics either. All right. But I think it's got a lot to tell us. And my criterion isn't so much what is proved in the laboratory experiments. It is that a lot of the traits that they've identified, I see them in myself, and I see them in the people that are around me. Okay. So I'm at the business school, and I deal very often with, obviously business school students, but also with executives and people who have to create business models and form some kind of view of what the future might hold for their organizations. And the work that I do with the colleagues I mentioned is on this particular problem. And it turns out that with respect to something like hypothesis generation, it's been found in behavioral economics, but I think it's, as I say, you can find it in yourself. You don't have to look too hard. That our ability to do this well is hampered by all kinds of psychological biases, ways in which we are hardwired, which make us less good at generating hypotheses than we might otherwise be. So here's just a couple of things. I don't have the time to talk about each of them, but you'll see some of them yourself. We're looking for hypotheses, and as soon as we see something which looks right, we stop looking. Who's not done that before? Instead of looking just a little bit harder. Systematically, people don't generate enough hypotheses, and they don't get enough of a spread in the hypotheses, and so on and so on. So there's a list there, and I guess if you want to have the slides, I'll be happy if it's provided afterwards. I don't have the time to walk through each of one of these. And then when it comes to evaluating hypotheses, we're also pretty bad at it, and this is also something which has been found systematically in the laboratory experiments which these people do. And here's a couple of things, and again, I don't need to be convinced by what's in the academic papers. I see this in myself, and I see this in the people around me. People don't look enough, they don't look hard enough, they don't get enough information. They look at only the most readily available information. Just think about yourselves. You're on Google and you want to look up something, and straight away, first thing you see, that must be right, and then you stop looking, even though the real answer might be another page down. Yeah. And we're not, it's a surprising thing, but not everything on the planet is on Google. You know all this. And then the most important of those, which I think psychologists would regard as the most confirmed hypothesis about human behavior, is this idea of the confirmation bias. The tendency most people seem to have of gathering information, but then looking at information, interpreting information in a way which is kind to what they want to believe. All right, that we tend to see what we want to see, tend to explain things in terms of our presuppositions and in terms of our background beliefs. Very, very strongly confirmed hypothesis. And of course, this is something that blinkers us, that interferes with our ability to see more widely. Okay, so there's a whole bunch of such biases, and they're on the screen. I'm not going to talk through each of them. And that brings me on to the unknown unknowns and the black swans. Now, I guess most of you know who these two people are. I made the mistake in one talk by referring to the one on the left. Sorry, it's your left, yeah, as a handsome gentleman. And there was a person from an NGO in New York, and she really lost it with me. She thought I was saying he was a nice guy. She said he's in fact a war criminal. I don't know if he is, but you know what these two people are famous for. The one on the left is Donald Rumsfeld, the unknown unknowns idea, and the one on the right is Taleb. He's the guy that's written a lot about black swans. And these people, they don't have a big profile in the academic literature on decision making. They're mentioned sometimes, but they're of course practical people for the most part. Although Nassim Taleb is he's also a university person now, but he's coming at it from a practical point of view. Okay, so just to give you a feel for this, Tony's seen this before, and I know this is cheating a little bit. If you imagine me in front of you with a die in my hand, and I'm going to roll the die, and I want you to watch the screen. So now I'm rolling the die, all right, and here we go, and it turns up a 9. All right, I had some smart person tell me that's a 6 upside down. It's not, it's a 9. All right, okay. By the way, I set this whole thing up with a die beforehand because I spent a lot of time talking to people who are not first language English speakers, and then it's not always clear what a die is. Of course, all of you knew what the die was. So in a way, I kind of, I cheated a little bit. But I imagine most of you would imagine that I would have had a normal die in my hand. And of course, what was going on was that it was one of these exotic die. So you can get all kinds of exotic die. So this was a 9-sided die. Okay. But that's the kind of thing it's just to give you a feel of the kind of thing that we're getting at. So our presuppositions is the person's talking about a die, and then you have the normal classical die in mind. And then, of course, something like this happens. There's an unknown possibility, an unknown unknown perhaps. And then the idea is that when an unknown unknown actually comes to pass and actually happens, that would be what Nassim Taleb calls a black swan. All right, so that's more or less the connection. The connections between what they say are actually quite complicated, and they're at the end of the slides, if the slides are distributed. I don't have the time to talk all the way through that. It gets quite fiddly. All right, but just very quickly, so there's the black swan. Here's the famous statement, which was in the press briefing in 2002. There's some things we know that we know, some things that we know that we don't know, and then some things that we don't know that we don't know, and those are the unknown unknowns. A lot of people thought this was final proof that Donald Rumsfeld had completely lost his marbles. In fact, he won a prize in this country, which was called the Foot in the Mouth Award, which is awarded every year for the public figure who makes the most crazy statement that year. And he won that award for this particular statement. But I think there is a logic in it. And so, again, very quickly, I'm skating over a lot of stuff very quickly, but just so we have an idea what we're talking about, as a known, according to him, is any feature of the world that we have knowledge of. An unknown is any feature of the world that the individual in question does not have knowledge of. And his definition of known unknowns are gaps in knowledge that we know exist, and that unknown unknowns are gaps in our knowledge that we don't even know about. All right. So I don't know if any of you have ever come across exotic dye, 9-sided dye before. Some of you may not have, and for you, presumably, that would have been a case of an unknown unknown. And then, just very quickly mention Nassim Taleb. He's the Black Swan guy, and this is he defines black swans in terms of 3 properties. And again, it's a long story, but the property 2 and property 3, the argument could be made that they're quite strange and there are problems with them, but I'm just going to ignore them completely, because the important one for us is the first one. So he thinks about black swans as being events, typically, that were outliers. And by that he means that they're outside of our normal expectations. He talks about a tunnel of possibilities that people have, so their subjective view of what's possible. And the black swan is something that comes from outside that, and if it does happen, then it comes as a big surprise. So that effectively, roughly, is the idea. And the normal story is this one. That's the event that is usually given as a black swan. Of course, this is interesting because presumably for some people involved, this was not a black swan. Presumably the terrorists, the people in the planes, were imagining something like this. And it turns out that the body in America that looks after air defense, NORAD, it actually runs simulations of just this happening. So it was certainly not an unknown unknown for them, and therefore not a black swan for them. But they were, of course, very surprised, because it's hard to predict exactly when that kind of event is going to happen. But for me, and I guess for many of you, this might have been a black swan, something that you might not have imagined as even as a possibility, and then came as a big surprise. Okay, now, because I have an ontology similar to Tony's, so an emergent world, I think that there are some things that come to pass. So events that happen, for example, which are not predictable even as possibilities. So even the best scientists with all the best information available, the best computers and all the rest of it, can't foresee. As I say, can't foresee even as possibilities. And my example here is every now and then there's a new kind of virus or disease that pops up which has never been seen before. And then the scientific community has to do something about it and come up with the appropriate medicines and so on. But that's just my belief. I believe the world is like that. I'm not a determinist. But however, one may look at that. So whatever you believe in that respect, I think that there are a lot of things that come as big surprises, things that were not on our radars even as possibilities before they happened, which we could have known about. And I've already given this as an example. Some people were imagining this as a possibility, including people whose job was really to do something about it and to be prepared for this kind of event. And as I say, the thing which I'm interested in this work that we do is whether we can do better at uncovering some of those possibilities as possibilities before they come and blindside us and surprise us. And you see now why I talked a lot about these psychological biases, because what we are interested in is ways in which those psychological biases may be blinkering us, and whether or not they're techniques that we can use to unblinker ourselves to some extent. Okay. How am I doing in terms of time?
It's still fine. You've got about 9 minutes, I'd say.
9 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, and just by the way, it's maybe worth you knowing this if you're interested in this stuff. For many people, black swans are low probability or low frequency events. And I just want to give you a simple example to say that that needn't be the case. And on the screen there, I have a 7-sided die. Another one of those exotic die. And I could have played the same trick I played with you with the other die. And then you would have been surprised by the 7. I'm sure most of you would have been surprised. And you can see that you could actually rig that die in such a way that the frequency, the relative frequency of that 7, some people call that the probability, would be as high as 50%. So if you flatten it out, it becomes like a coin. All right. So you have this really surprising event for you, presumably the 7, but actually, 50% probability, a high probability. And it's the same with the black swans. I don't know if you've been to Australia, some of you would have been. In Europe all that time, people had never seen a black swan, so much so that there was a saying that a good wife is as rare as a black swan. There's a Roman poet called Juno. I don't believe that. Now, this is a long time ago. They had these funny views. But of course, if you were in the right parts of Australia, you can go there now, there are black swans all the time. It wouldn't have been surprising to those people there. So it depends on your situation too. Okay, and then I just wanted to show you, well, it just happened to be in the slides. This, if you're interested, is a fair 7-valued die. All right, and printed on a 3D printer, but that's all not really relevant. One thing about black swans is that they may be positive. They don't have to be negative. The black makes it sound that they're always negative. And the example I used at the business school of a black swan that is positive is something I've done a lot of work on with Phil Faulkner, in fact, on the gramophone turntable, where in the 1990s this became a big money spinner, this particular turntable, where people started using it as a musical instrument, and it's not happening. There they are. So you know that phenomenon, right, where you can study the turntable as a musical instrument at Berkeley in Boston. The professor of the turntable. You know that stuff, the scratching, American baseball bat, hat, the wrong way around, all that stuff? Okay. Okay, so that was a black swan for that company. They hadn't dreamt of it, but they then manipulated it hugely. And of course, they sold more of this particular turntable in the 1990s than Gibson and Fender together sold guitars. And now the black swan is that the turntable is coming back. All right, so they're making these really high-end turntables for people who want to listen to music again, as opposed to make music with turntables. I was horrified when I found out how much that turntable cost. Anyone know? It's just amazing. £5,300. Okay, 5 minutes?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so the thing about economics departments and business schools is they don't talk about unknown unknowns and black swans very much. And that's because more so in economics departments, also in business schools, they typically start with models which presuppose that you know all the possible outcomes beforehand. Probability doesn't work otherwise. All right, so that you have it's always the full set. And then once you assume that, once you assume standard probabilities, then unknown unknowns are out of the picture by assumption. And there's actually not much, even in the business school, to show how to deal with them. And what I want to do in my last few minutes is just to show you the kind of work we're doing to come up with really heuristics or techniques that business people might use to at least uncover possibilities when they are thinking about their businesses. It's also a useful heuristic. People who do innovation are interested in this because it's about opening up the mind to possibilities. So this is just one of these. So just very quickly, this is a famous Cambridge person you should all know if you go to the antechamber at Trinity College, where they have the sculpture of Newton. To one side there's a sculpture of this guy, so he's a really big Cambridge guy, Francis Bacon, writing in the 17th century, and in those days they weren't philosophers of science. The disciplines hadn't siloed in the way that they are now. They wrote on lots of stuff, but he's very famous for his work on scientific method, and he was a big critic of induction and the idea that you should keep on repeating experiment in the same conditions. He says if you do that, it's like you're being like a child, you're not learning anything new. He was very keen on scientists testing the hypothesis by varying the circumstances in which they're testing the hypothesis. And it kind of makes sense because if the mechanism you're testing, if it shines through in many different circumstances, you have a stronger reason for believing it. It's quite modern because his approach is about eliminating possibilities. Okay, so it's there's a kind of Popper element in it. but it's about varying circumstances. And this is how it works, all right? So a very famous scientist who used this method in science was Coffin Pressure, a famous etymologist, Nobel Prize winner, and his thing was bees. And he's the guy that discovered that bees do dances to communicate with each other about where the good flowers are. One of his things was, it must have been a weird guy, one of his things was bees can see blue, all right? And he wanted to test that using this Baconian method. And the way that it works is you have a maintained hypothesis, in this case that bees can see blue, and the way that you test it is to toss out other hypotheses, alternative hypotheses, and try and disconfirm them. And every time you disconfirm an alternative, you have more reason for believing your working hypothesis. And you carry on doing that until you can't disconfirm the alternative hypothesis, which then becomes the working hypothesis. So very quickly, that's how it works. So, for example, what he did was he had bees coming to some blue bits of cardboard. He put sugar water onto blue bits of cardboard. All right. And the experiment is then one in which you come up with alternative suggestions about why the bees are always going back to the same piece of cardboard every time you look. Okay. So what would an alternative hypothesis be? That it's not the color, what else could it be? Yeah.
Always in the same place.
Location. All right, so how do you test that? And you test that by moving the cards. All right, if the bees are still going back to the blue cards, you know that it's not the location. All right, you've ruled out that alternative. What else could it be? Well, we don't have the time. It could be the smell. All right, so what did he do? He put a piece of glass between the bee and the blue cards. They still go to the blue cards, so it's not the smell. All right, every time you rule something out, you have more reason to believe your hypothesis that it's actually the blue. Apparently they can see blue. They can't tell the difference between black and red, but they can see blue. Okay. So the work we've been doing is to amend this approach in a way which is suitable for business people. And what attracts us with this is that if you think about it, it's about exploring possibility spaces. It's about the scientist thinking up alternatives, thinking outside of the box, and then testing the theory by testing the alternatives, and then very often learning a lot in doing that testing. Okay? I'm doing this very quickly, and I'll quickly show you the algorithm and then I'll stop. Okay, I'm not even going to talk about that because Callum is going to get grumpy with me. All right, but imagine this. All right, this is classic business school stuff you guys will be doing. You'll create business models for your businesses. I promise you, you'll be doing it. You'll be running your Excel spreadsheets. And then if you're trying to raise money, it's not only one scenario, one business model which you are going to be asked to produce. You're going to be asked to produce a range of scenarios. All right. Your investors are going to ask for that. And these scenarios or these business plans, they're not predictions in a sense. They're sometimes thought as such. What they really are is a possible plan of action. And then when you start implementing, straight away you find you have to alter the business plan. Okay, but that's normal. But they set out a schedule for what you're going to do. And what the investors and you as a business person, what you should be interested in is, are there any ways in which this might be dramatically wrong? What could be out there which would really blow this out of the water? Or alternatively, what might be out there which would make this a much bigger success than I'd ever dreamt of even beforehand? Okay, so imagine you've done 3 of these. You've created 3 of these scenarios. Here's what I suggest to you, all right? Remember this moment. Tall South African person, 6:30. Lecture room 2, Mill Lane, okay? You'll be asked to do brainstorming at some point, all right? You'll be evaluating scenarios. Here's what I suggest. Flip chart, draw a red line, and put the unfavorable on the left and the favorable on the right. And then ask your people, your team who's come up with the business plans, to locate their business plans or scenarios on that scale. Anyone know quickly why I put them like that? Psychological biases, right? Yeah. All right? Overconfidence, not enough spread in the hypotheses, confirmation bias, all the rest of it. And here is the idea. The idea is then to say to your team, fantastic, because you're good managers, good job. But now I want you to think of something which would be disastrous for this business. And think crazy, think outside of the box, and create the appropriate scenario. And they do that for you, and then, it's like a stress testing. They do that for you, and they would come up with something which would be over there. If they've done a really good job, they've really been outside of the box, there would be the scenario. This is standard brainstorming, all right? The second thing would be to say to them, fantastic job, now go away and come back tomorrow and do some serious research. I want you, the team, you're the boss, you tell the team, I want you to come back tomorrow and give me the evidence I'd require for us to keep this in our planning as a possible scenario. I want you to prove to me, all right? That's it, all right? And why would we recommend that? Well, there are two main reasons. The first one is you don't want to say to them, disprove it, disconfirm, as the original method, because they'll come back to you and say, disconfirmed it. It took me 5 minutes. I was on Google, all right? And they will stop too early. But if you incentivize them, if you persuade them to try and confirm it, they will spend some time doing some research. And the point is this, it doesn't matter at all whether this is actually a live possibility. The point is that in dragging them out and thinking about the business, but from a completely different point of view that they would have been before, they would have been seeing things that they would not have dreamt of before you forced them to do it. And I've done this repeatedly in real situations with execs. They suddenly start learning things they hadn't seen before. And the reason is that they're not looking here where they would normally be looking and where the confirmation bias keeps them. All right, it's a way of getting them out of their comfort zones and thereby counteracting the confirmation bias. What usually happens is that they come back and they say, no, this is not going to happen. You rule it out. Okay, and then you might ask them to do it again. But what, in my experience, usually happens is that they come back very quickly and they say, oh, my original scenarios were way off base. I want to adjust them. And that's exactly what you want. And so the idea is not hypothesis first and then test and then move. The idea is that actually in generating hypothesis, that's part of the testing process and a way to drag people into places they would not normally be and see all kinds of possibilities they wouldn't see otherwise. Try it. And I've stopped.
Oh, thank you. Now we've heard both our speakers give their talks, we can move on to questions. They can either be direct attacks on maybe the arguments of the speakers or just general questions. So, yeah.
So I have a question for the first speaker. I'm sorry I didn't catch your name.
Totally.
So I agree with pretty much everything that you said in your talk, but I'm wondering if economics were sort of reconstructed along the lines that you propose, what would differentiate it substantially from other social sciences or humanities? Or would it just sort of be an interdisciplinary field of inquiry that would try to unify?
Well, it's an excellent question. I didn't expect it here. Yes, my focus is ontology, the nature of stuff, the nature of social reality. Economics, or the social sciences, but economics is one of the few areas where the discipline is demarcated not on the basis of the nature of stuff we're looking at. Biology is demarcated, it studies life forms, physics because of the sort of principles, chemistry, history obviously because it's passage over time. If economics was to be differentiated on the basis of the nature of the stuff we deal with, then you're right, economics would be no different from sociology, politics, anthropology, and so on. Basically, we are all looking at the same thing from a different angle, different side. So the logical result of taking ontology seriously is we'd, instead of having different faculties, we'd have the faculty of social science, where economists were next door to gender studies, to sociology, to politics, all looking at the same phenomena, but with different questions from a different point of view, with different sets of interests, but interacting with each other, just as they do in physics. I mean, there are many different types of physics, but they're in the same buildings talking to each other. That's what would follow.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Is that no one?
Jochen, what do you, I mean, how do you kind of, if you're going to evaluate the importance of the different types of unknowns and knowns, I mean, would you have a difference between unknown knowns and unknown unknowns? Do you think because we don't know the unknown unknowns, they're perhaps more dangerous or more beneficial, or does it just not matter?
We have definitions of all of these things, and for the thing that we call an unknown, it might be something completely trivial and doesn't make any difference to your life at all. So when you read something that was not as a possibility in your mind before you read it, and it might just be something which doesn't affect you at all. But then there are some things which can be very important. So for Taleb, he makes it a condition of black swanhood that it's somehow a significant event. It has a large impact, I think is the way that he said it, but not on the account that we are giving. But as I was saying, the idea is that I see with entrepreneurs, people get into businesses, politicians make decisions about referendums, when with just a little bit more work, they would have been more alive to the dangers and possibly also to the benefits. It's no accident in my view that the German MP, Gisela Stewart, she spent a lot of time in the north, and she was visiting a lot of these post-industrial cities and talking to people, and she said she wasn't surprised by the vote. I wonder how many of the people in Westminster were making that effort. And sometimes, there's no great cost involved. The thing which amazes me with the internet is A, how easy it is to get all kinds of information, but B, and there's research on this, how few sites people visit. A lot of people visit just 4 sites. And then if it's their newspaper, then they get completely locked into echo chambers. You will look at the blogs, if you read the Fox News site, it's always the same people, and they're all talking to each other, and they're all convincing each other. What I think people should do is, if you're on the right-hand side of the political spectrum, you should be reading The Guardian or Socialist Worker or whatever. And if you're on the left wing, you should be reading the FT and the Times. You will never get an objective view, fully objective view, but just to have a better idea of what's going on. A lot of what's going on in America, I think, with Trump is that people are locked into this very narrow view and are completely convinced, and it's very hard to persuade people otherwise. And then strangely, in this world now where we have all the information at our fingertips, it's so much easier to get it than before. Yeah. And I'm talking too much, but the idea with this, I did it very quickly, is what you want to do is get people out of their comfort zones and try and get them to be in a position where they see things from an opposite or different point of view for them. So in leadership, which is a subject, imagine a subject called leadership in the business school, I think a lot of it's got to do with listening well and listening as hard as you can to the people who are talking to you. And for a lot of people, listening hard means you the 20 minutes of that person, you give up the time, and you listen hard, and you try and be empathetic in the rest of it. But maybe it's a little bit more than that. Maybe the trick is to try as much as one can to step out of yourself and try actually to listen to what that person is saying to you from that person's point of view. Okay, it's another variation of this idea, but it's about taking it out of your normal perspective and giving you, and my experience is you learn all kinds of things which you wouldn't have seen otherwise. You come out of a conversation, I really try to understand what the person was saying, but actually, you might have fallen well short.
Okay, are there any more questions? Yeah.
Is there any evidence that we're getting better at predicting the economy? Obviously, there are always going to be some unknowns, but surely with greater computing power, you can take more variables into account. But is it just flatly they will always be wrong by the same degree?
You're looking at me, and Tony's nodding.
No question.
It's 40 times, Monty Python.
Monty Python. Yeah.
Talk to one and look at one and talk to the other. I believe not. I mean, I can't prove that it's so. I mean, econometricians sustain the project I think once we've added a few more variables or a bit more data or a bit more disaggregated, eventually we'll get there. And you can't actually prove that's wrong, but I'm saying all those models presuppose closed atomistic worlds. I can't, again, prove, if you want to insist you're an atom, that under conditions X you always do the same Y, I mean, or you do this, I mean, if you can make yourself a complicated atom, you can always say in conditions X1, X2, X3 to X 10,000, I always do the same Y, and that's kind of what you're arguing. We just need to get X1 to X 10,000 in. I'm just saying I don't think it's necessary. You can go from surface, I think it wouldn't happen, but in any case, we can go from surface phenomena to the underlying causal condition. Instead of trying to get all the variables so we predict where the autumn leaf will land, we just go behind the fact that most fall downwards to gravity. Once we've got gravity, we can build bridges and rockets to the moon and so on. We can act in the world capably. We don't need all the factors that would predict where all the leaves go. And in the human social realm, where I believe we also have choice, prediction is not possible anyway. But if you hold on to a view, I'm not saying you, if one were to hold on to a view that they were an atom, and it's just a question of stipulating all the conditions, it's not falsifiable even by his methods.
Okay, any? Yeah.
So I guess I have two questions. I'll try to make them very short. The first one is, do you have examples of economists or philosophers or social theorists whose methodologies you admire and who you take to be inspirations? And then the second is, I wonder if you could spell out in a little more detail what exactly you mean by prediction, because it seems to me that if you were to take the view that you have of wanting to incorporate ontology into the study of economics, then you could say that we could have we could make certain statements provided that they were at a sufficient level of abstraction or generalization, where we would have reason to believe with high probability that they would always obtain. So for instance, you could say, an increase in economic inequality, holding everything else constant, will lead to social instability or something like that. And you could, I would argue, have reason to believe that you could be pretty confident that such a statement would obtain over a wide variety of conditions.
Methodology I admire. I mean, I don't think admire is the right word, but the implication for what I'm saying is don't choose methods in advance. It depends on context. Like I said, when they came up with a theory to explain apparent mass of massless or apparently massless particles, they needed electron accelerator. For other theories, they need different sorts of instruments. So rather than having a methods course and knowing in advance all the methods, start with the problem. Unlike Jochen with starting different alternatives, I think the point is to start with puzzles, contradictions, which need resolving. There's usually only one explanation anyway. I support taking that orientation. Dialectical methods, to me, seem the most important. By dialectical, I mean something like thesis, well, it's a bit trite, but thesis, antithesis, synthesis. And you start from the second stage, antithesis. That is, you start from a contradiction. You look out the window, you see a flying cow. That contradicts everything you know about cows. What you know about cows is the thesis, the starting point. That contradicts what you understand, so you might go and have a look, but if you can come up with anything that can make sense of it, like people throwing it up, that's probably the only explanation that works. I know it's a silly example, but that sort of method, start from a contradiction and try and work out what could explain it. Normally, if your contradictions are severe enough, there's only one feasible explanation anyway. And there are many variations on a thing like contrast explanation. I'm happy to give you references to all sorts of papers that use these sorts of methods. The second question is a certain level of abstraction certain events, regularities may hold with a particular level, high level probability. Possibly. I actually reject all notions of probability. It's not a word in my language anyway. But would you find event regularities at high level abstraction? Possibly. I don't think we need, all we need to know is the way mechanisms work. You talk about inequality might cause instability. Just know that inequality, if people recognise it, can lead to dissatisfaction, and people, especially if they're one end of the spectrum, have got very little income, terrible conditions, they're going to have to find ways to survive. What happens depends on context. I mean, the context may be a slave society, it may be a society where inequality has always been there, or a society of religious people who not into material possessions anyway, they're all demonstrated, just all happens. But if there are perhaps I should say, I'm not opposing mathematical modelling or search for prediction and so on. I'm not really going to oppose anything. Most of all, I'm against the bias of modern economics, which is only orientated to that sort of thing. My starting point is that people have looked and looked and looked for correlations at work, and they don't find them, they don't break down. That's my starting point, and I'm trying to both explain that and say, well, we don't need predictive methods anyway, and in fact we don't want them either. But if you find them at high level of abstraction time, I'm happy.
Brilliant. I think we have time for one more question. So.
Yes. So I appreciate that it's beneficial to think about possibilities, but if you think about politics, parties and politicians will always be narrow-minded in a sense that because they will be left-wing or in the middle or right-wing, so they will have a line and can't deviate from much from their original stance. So, how do you think this problem can be improved under democratic and political context?
That's a big question. How could it be improved? Well, if you were going from what I was saying today, maybe one way to improve it would to create a climate in which there's more of an expectation of people within any particular persuasion to spend some time doing some serious looking at what other people are arguing and why they're arguing what they're arguing, as opposed to a lot of what I see, which is people talking to like-minded people way too much. So I think the general policy recommendation, even for everyday life, out of what I was talking about, was challenge your views, and if you like to go to particular sites and they seem to be speaking to you, well, go and spend some time on sites that are coming from an opposing point of view, and get some idea of what's going on. I spent a lot of time arguing with Tony about the National Health Service. I think in order to get a handle on something like that, you should be reading what's in the newspapers, in The Guardian, where you get one view, and then what you might get on the other side. But it's also very interesting to try and speak to some of the people involved. Speak to some of the surgeons and some of the nurses.
But after they have considered other possibilities and other views, if they decide to switch their to make a radical deviation from their original view, would that mean that they will lose some support from their voters?
Well, maybe they might. But if it's a more informed view and they change their minds as a result of that, surely that's a good thing. Wouldn't we want Donald Trump to have a slightly wider view of things? Particularly if he goes on to become president of the United States. Yeah.
Fantastic. So I think we should give our speakers another big round of applause.